and welcome back to the Rally Report podcast. We have a very special guest joining us today, and I cannot believe I got her on such short notice, so very thankful that she agreed to join in. She very, very recently announced her retirement from the PSA Tour, which we'll get into, but welcome, Olivia Blatchford Clyne. How are you?
Good, thanks. How are you doing?
Good. I just want to start this off with a quick check-in on how you feel since you put out your heartfelt message on hanging up the racket. It's been 2 days, I believe, since you posted it. Have you been overwhelmed with messages? Are you having second thoughts? Are you just hungover from the celebrations from the past couple?
Yeah, it's funny because although I announced it 2 days ago, I've known that I was going to do this for quite a while. It was more, there was some question around whether I knew I wanted to take an extended period of time away from competing. That was definitely very clear to me for quite some time now. And I kind of made the decision, I would say probably a month ago. I would say around a month ago where I was like, okay, I think this is how I'm feeling. I kind of talked it through. I felt a lot of different ways and had a lot of conversations with myself, and people that I trust and love to see kind of, just to make sure, that I was thinking clearly because I kind of value that rational voice. As an athlete, you're constantly this balance between this heightened passion that really comes from your heart and there's also this rational brain of trying to figure things out. And I think if you've watched any of the squash I play, I definitely mostly get ruled by this part and less by the brain, more heart, less brain. So I always try and check in with people to see if I'm like, well, if I use my, I'm feeling this here, but if I use my head this way, can I see it? So anyway, I've been kind of had figured out what I really wanted a while ago. So it was just a matter of coming up with the right words. And I actually felt really comfortable saying how I feel. I kind of always have. I've always tried to make every interview or post match conversation that I've had as real as possible. I've always really valued that from other players when they're, leave themselves exposed and vulnerable. I found that that was the most kind of the authenticity of their stories was always what drove me to be better. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to just really leave it all out there. And I think I got what I wanted to say right. So that was a good feeling. Overwhelmed for sure by the messages I've received. I mean, I think I haven't heard from so many people. And I will say this, like my husband, Alan, is the exact same. When he decided he was going to retire, he really didn't want to make an announcement. And I had said to him, I was like, I might just like sneak out in the dead of night. And they just like, some people like, move up on the ranking list by one. They're like, wait, who's actually, just completely, like slide under, go off into the darkness, no one knows. And he was like, no, Olivia, like you have to say something. And I had said the same thing to him. I was like, Alan, like you have to say something.
That's fun.
And yeah, and I do not regret that I did that because honestly, the outpouring it makes you realize, squash really is like this very sport in general is a very myopic existence, right? You're very singularly focused, right? And you're dealing with people with high expectations, perfectionism. It's very hard to really, eagle view it out, right? And see it for the big picture. And when you get, 100 messages saying, I love watching you play and you've been an inspiration or you've affected my life. You made me want to play. I had one of my best friends say, like you made me fall in love with the game. And that was like, to me, that's what really, I get goosebumps saying that now because it's like, that's all I ever wanted was for people to watch and people to say, oh my goodness, I want to play because that's what it was to me watching, pros when I was a kid. But yeah, honestly, it's been really nice. I feel very content. Um, I saw a few players playing. I'm actually in Scotland right now. I've spent Christmas with Alan's family, and then I've got few players playing in the Scottish Junior Open. And I less see this idea of like wanting to compete because I'm definitely feeling that's like one of the biggest things why I did want to retire is because I haven't been feeling like I want to be in battle and compete. But I did see a few pro players training. And for those of people who know me, I love to train. Like that's when I'm in my happy zone is going to the club, staying all day, getting in my sections and doing things. And I have to say, there's a part of me that was like, oh my goodness, I'd love to be doing drive, drive, drop right now, which is crazy. And Alan was like, but you can, like, that's the whole point. And I'm like, I know it's fantastic. So no, I'm
Yeah,
very content.
I say.
Olivia, I kind of wanted to dive into this because I think as a fan and a lot of people out there were a bit shook by your news. I kind of just want to give a little bit of context here from like the outsiders. Like I'd say this entire year has been a huge success from the outside perspective of, I know that rampage you were on earlier in 2023 that caught headlines everywhere that she's coming after everyone to start 2023. And also, I mean, in general, the sports age of being 30 is pretty young still. And I think that aspect too threw many of us off when you just announced it. And I'm sure you've thought it through for a long time, but I want to kind of dive into why have you been feeling this way? And has this been something that you've dealt with your entire career, of the heat of the battle and that kind of getting too much? But yeah, just wanted to dig into that.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like you said, I think for anyone in any walk of life, we only really see this, like, polished exterior, what you show people, what you want them to see. And I think it's been no question that as I've played in my life, that I've kind of always been either like one of, you know, one of my own worst enemies. I think that that's I'm very comfortable and saying that because I know it's the truth. I know it to be very true. And honestly, it's a very fine line. Success is one of those things that if you determine success based on results, you are not going to be very happy. And obviously I remember, people go back to that time where I had this run and I was competing. And I remember at that time in particular, it was easier for me to let go of the outcome because I was already like, Olivia, if you're not enjoying this, if you're not happy in this moment, let's just give it up. You've been doing this for a very long time, and admittedly, I have felt since I was young that there was a lot of expectation. A lot of it was based on feelings that I put on myself, pressures I put on myself. Some of it was perceived external pressures, and some of them were real external pressures. But I think I realized that I also I am not like a one size fits all person. And I think that for quite a while now, being my own worst enemy or being my own best friend, all of these things around competition has also been made exacerbated by the fact that I have other things in my life that I want to do. I've never been I've never really had the ability to be so singularly focused on my squash. I felt that actually that always hurt me. I felt some of the best times I played was when I was taking a school course or, honestly, I really had underestimated the effect of Alan retiring on me competing because I had this like my built-in friend who was traveling with me everywhere. And to be honest with you, focusing on his playing was actually like very helpful for me to get out of my own head. And I've always played better when I'm either with him or when I've been at like billets houses that I've stayed with them for a long time. They feel like family friends. I get distracted by where I am and what I'm doing. And I can kind of take that, just the competition, just this idea of having to perform out of it. But when last year, I'd kind of taken this pressure away and I'd really accepted that, you know what, I am where I am. If I'm not enjoying it, there's no point to it. So I'm going to accept that I could lose every match and I'm going to be okay with it. I'm going to walk in and I'm going to be okay with losing. And the funny thing is that I started winning a lot. So as soon as I accepted, yeah, I know, I accepted. I was like, yeah, you can lose, and would you still play if you were losing a lot? And the answer at that time was like, yeah, I was, I'm going to give it a try. And I actually saw this exponential growth, which I think in the long run actually hurt me because then the fall from that was quite big, right?
Yeah.
When you're feeling like you have to keep up the results. Well, if you're not beating another top 10 player this week, then it's not a good week. It's hard. So it's been an interesting thing. But I admittedly too, it's like there are other things I also want in my life, and I kind of feel like I've been defined, and I do think that this is what it kind of boils down to at the end, is that I have been defined as a squash player since I was about 5 years old. I learned the game from my father, and it was like our adventure. And I think he never assumed that I was going to be that, you know, as good as I was. And when I showed a lot of promise and I was a very successful junior, we kind of got swept in this thing of like, well, Olivia is a squash player, and I made a lot of decisions based on this idea of being a squash player. And I realized that the older I've gotten is that you can't have an identity that is the sport that you are playing. You can't even have an identity of the job that you are, right? Or you're doing, right? It's not, you aren't your job, I should say. And for me, I felt like in order to move forward with my life and honestly, even one day come back to competing in some capacity, in order for me to do that in a healthy way and to truly be happy and just love the game, because I do love it so much, that this was an important part, was to sever the ties between my identity as Olivia, Olivia Clyne or Olivia Blatchford as squash player. And okay, what is Olivia Clyne? What does she do? What is she interested in? And does she have squash in this next, you know,
Mm.
amalgamation of who I am? So yeah, I think it's complex, right? Like sport is complex. And obviously squash is one of those things where we have these almost dynasty of successes, right? So you have very, very, very successful people. You have groups of like small pockets of people who are around the same time. And then you kind of tend to have like, much like tennis, where you have like, the big three or the big four, right? You have like a few, great runs here, a few great runs
Mm.
there. It's a very hard lifestyle to define your identity on. So I think for me, it kind of just was like, you know what? I'm ready to evolve. I want this to look different. I want my relationship with squash to look different. I want that to be just purely love. And because I do love it so much. And I think everyone who knows me is like, oh my gosh, but Olivia's like the biggest squash nerd and she's obsessed with it. And I am, like, I totally am. Like, I'm watching the juniors today and I'm like, but do you see the way that they're cutting this ball here? And oh, I wish they like did, because I can't help it. I love it. I'm
Mm.
addicted to it, but that doesn't mean every addiction is good for you, right?
Oof.
So it's
Yeah.
right.
The double-edged
So
sword. Yeah.
totally, totally. So yeah, I think evolution, I think that's really what it comes down to, is personal
Yeah.
evolution.
I don't want to linger too hard on this, but I'm curious actually how it's interesting, the timeline of this, how this all happened, because I guess the Olympics news just came out.
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear how were you feeling about it? I'm sure maybe those lingering thoughts of retirement were already happening around that time. And then the Olympics news out of nowhere. I don't know if you got an inside scoop earlier, but yeah, how did that have an effect on how you were thinking?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm so stoked for squash to be in the Olympics, and
Mm.
I'm not gonna lie and say that there isn't a part of me that's like, well, it's like 5 years away, right? 4.5 years away. Like,
Mhm.
I don't know what's gonna happen in the future. I don't know even what that process for making an Olympic team would look like.
Mhm.
Um, and that's why I'm kind of not saying that I'm leaving squash. I purposely put, I will
Yeah,
no
I saw the
longer be
cryptic
playing.
message.
Yeah, exactly. I said I will no longer be playing on the PSA World Tour. And
Yeah.
I put that particularly because, one, I love playing for my country. I've played for the US since I was 15 years old. And it's
Mm.
always been something that's extremely important for me, and to me. And one of the greatest honors of my life has been representing my country. But I did specifically put that, because it is so far away. But I had a very interesting, I'm very close to my father, and I had a long conversation with him when I was going through this. And honestly, of all the people, he's like definitely taking it the hardest. And not because he's like, you should keep playing. He's just like, what, the tales of like Liv and Dad are over? And I'm like, no, Dad, it's just changing. Like the tale doesn't end. It's just like a different chapter.
Uh-huh.
But I have to say, like, 4.5 years is a very long time. And I knew for a fact, and I know this in my heart, that there's no chance I'm making the Olympics if I was just to keep continuing to do what I was doing. I know that for a fact. Like, I've never been so sure of something, that there was no chance, just with the mentality I had, problems with, around the identity issues, and also like that type, like I said, I've been kind of a professional forever. I think people think of me, they like hear that I'm 30, but they're also like, Jesus, girl's like been around forever. And I have been around
Mm.
forever. And that to maintain the passion and the focus, I've, I mean, now I don't even have to knock on wood because it doesn't even matter. I don't have to compete, but I've never been really injured. The longest period
Mm.
of time I ever took out was during COVID, but everyone was out. So it doesn't really count as being away. I've never had an injury. I've never been out of the game longer than 3 weeks, I think.
Wow.
I've never, yeah, since I was very young. And I knew in my heart that I was like, there is zero chance, like 0% chance that I make the Olympic team because I am flaming out so hard right now.
Mm.
I'm losing the excitement. I'm losing all of the passion to compete. But what if I honored this other part of me that has these desires, that wants to see what else I can do and what else I can be? And if I then, after that, decided, hey, I miss this. I want to compete. I want to see what I can
Yeah.
do. That person has a chance at the Olympics, I think. A better
Mm.
chance than the person who's like 14 in the world right now and is hanging on, clinging on for dear life. That
I
person's not
see.
making anything.
Hmm.
And whether or not that even actually happens one day is, I don't know. It's up in the squash god's hands if I'll get a message that's, in my heart that says, hey, do you want to join the rodeo again? But I have to say, I don't see myself taking part in PSA. My squash, I'm coming back to it, will look very different. I'm nearly positive about that. But I also won't say that the Olympics is 100% out of the back of my mind, right?
Very
That's
happy
like,
to hear that. What was the toughest part about PSA that you think maybe, people like me who just watch these games to see the greatness of it? What are the toughest parts about being a part of the tour?
it's funny because I think there are so many great parts. And then I also think there are so many parts that you aren't really prepared for.
Mm.
Um, you know, Traveling long distances, having to find a way to do things is in many ways fantastic, right? You learn so much about yourself, but as it pertains to competition is very hard. Being in a hotel room with someone who you could compete with or you don't know and you're sharing a bathroom with them, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm a 30-year-old married woman and I'm like sharing with like, someone I don't know
Yeah.
that well. And we're like, it's kind of odd. I think ultimately it comes down to kind of two things. One is that that you're never satisfied, right? It's
Yeah.
constantly like, how can I get better? I want to be on squash TV more. I want this. I want that. It's very easy to never look back and say, wow, you did a really good job. That's something I always struggle with, is to be like, hey, well done. It was like, well, is it as good as this? And I think because we play an individual sport in general, there's this idea of constantly comparing ourselves with our peers, right? It's very hard to be like, well, this is my time. If I was in athletics and I had a 1500-meter time, it's like, well, did my time get better? But the best that I can do is that my 1500-meter time got better, right? I run a little
Hmm.
faster, whether I beat someone or not, I'm doing the best I can, right? And I think in squash, there's this idea of like, there's a stage, there's a performance to it. Calculating success is hard, and also calculating like worth is hard. We don't make very much money, right? This is all like, I mean, and I say this like, it really is like it is a passion project. It does not exist. If you are out to make money, do not play squash. At least, and I say that as someone who's been a part of it I know when there were no platinum events for women. I mean, I've been around it for that long, right? Where it's like a 50K was like a big event for women, right? And now we have like prize money parity and all of these other things. But if you're trying to make a solid living and you're not getting to every quarterfinal, it's not floweth, right? And that's like you have to
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
eight in the world, right? And that, so it's hard. It's hard to put down roots. You give up a lot of other commitments because you're constantly traveling, right? You're chasing points or you're chasing these things. And I think it creates a little bit of, you know, instability from the balancing who you are as a person and who you are as a player. Um, but I think honestly, it's mostly stuff like that. For the most part, everyone gets along with each other. No one's, I used to think sometimes that it could have tendencies to be maybe a little bit cliquey, that if you weren't in with one group, you were kind of on the outside. And I honestly was just like always happy on the outside. So I
Yeah.
kind of got along with everyone, but I was like never in a group. You know what I mean? I was like the kid in lunch. Like I'd walk in and I'm like, I could sit there. I could sit there. And then I'd be like, I'd rather read my book. So I'm going to sit by myself anyway, which was nice.
Mm.
And everyone was like that. But it is hard when we aren't surrounded by these big teams where well, I can go and have my entertainment. It's like, no,
Mm.
you have to interact with a lot of people that you have to compete against. And for the most part, everyone is there's a camaraderie because you're all in it together in this crazy little world. And sometimes you're also like, oh my gosh, like how is this even possible that I don't have my own personal space? And, it's tough, right? But I think, PSA has really grown since like I said, when I started, it's so different. PSA wasn't even the women, right? It was just so I had whisper patches on my skirts when I started, right? Like I've been around
Mm.
I've seen, score changing to 11. I've seen the tin dropping down, whisper turned WSA, then WSA merged with PSA. I mean, I literally, now that I say it, I sound really freaking old because
Yeah, I was gonna
I
say you said so it's like 50 right now.
exactly. I'm like back in the olden days. But it's true though, yeah, I think it's that. I think sometimes it's having to leave your loved ones behind when you travel. That's why I said it. I had the best times like with Alan, going to different places, meeting people. I think that's, it's hard to not have that normality all the time. I would say it's probably the hardest part.
Yeah. Olivia, I kind of wanted to dive into something that you kind of alluded to here was I've personally always found your professional journey to be very interesting. I think I was reading up on some articles and said you turned professional when you're 15 and there was like a brief moment of hiatus and then you came back. But I'm actually just super curious how you made those first initial years work as a professional. I know that it's a common conversation amongst the squash world, like how do you make a living out of it? And candidly, I'm curious to hear how did you make how were you able to, be
Yeah.
afloat at,
It's a good question. So basically what happened was I decided that I wasn't going to go to college. Actually, you know what? I take that back. I'll be honest. I think I didn't necessarily decide not to go. I think things evolved where I had made it. I I knew that I was going to play professional squash. And so I never
mm,
really set myself up to go and do the college thing. I honestly, I would have loved college. I'm a huge reader. I would have been like in every club. In fact, I think that the likelihood of if I had gone to university, I probably wouldn't have ever been a squash player, to be honest with you. I think I would have seen, and I think maybe I also subconsciously knew that about myself. And so I was like, hey, if you want to be a squash player, you should go and do it because
mm.
I'm in the clouds half the time. I'm like talking philosophy, I'm going like, oh, let's like read about the Stoics. It's like that's my brain works really strange. So I kind of never had really dipped my toe into the college scene. I started playing more PSA by the time I was about 15, 16, still in high school. I was teaching myself 10th, 11th, and 12th grades. I was homeschooled, independent study through the University of Nebraska. Go Cornhuskers. And I was playing more PSA. I saved the money from that and would play. And I did look, I always say, and I kind of brag about it, when Amanda and I played the US national championships when we were under 19, we were both top 40 in the world. So we were very good. Yeah, it's insane, right?
Yeah,
Like
it's insane
it's
to
just it's
think
like,
about.
what are you talking about? Yeah, we were both top 40 in the world. And think it's the times too, right? Like you can imagine Egyptian squash players doing that, but no, we're like these American girls doing it, at that
Yeah.
level. So by the time I had kind of amassed that, but I went on tour for my first year and basically I was like, I felt it was out of my league. It was too much. I was burnt out from the junior career that had a lot of expectations, a lot of success, a lot of expectations. And what ended up happening was I decided like I'm stopping for now. And what does one person who doesn't have any qualifications, has been singularly focused their entire lives, what does one do with the very minimal skills that I had? I got a job coaching at Chelsea Piers in Connecticut. And I basically worked like a dog for 12 months. I coached nonstop.
Coaching is
Did
exhausting.
Oh my God,
I don't know if
it,
people realize how fucking difficult it is.
it's
I actually think it's
terrible.
physically more difficult
It's
than
awful.
playing.
It's awful. It's awful. It's
Yeah.
awful. I loved sharing the knowledge. I loved being around kids who were keen. And I think I was lucky in the sense that I always seemed to I never worked with kids that were really not into it. I always got lucky. I think the kids who wanted information and high energy, they were drawn to whatever I was a group I was running. So I'd end up with these students that were all, high level juniors later on in their careers. Like now some of them are playing for junior national teams or
Mhm.
national teams, which is kind of cool. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I picked that kid up and I was like, you're going to be good. You're coming to my, Top Guns advanced group at Chelsea Pierce. But I started doing that and that's how I made money. And basically what happened is that first year, probably 3 or 4 months into like I'm not playing right now. I then started training again. I started entering a few
Mhm.
events and basically I was training in the morning, coaching at night and would do that, save up money, go to an event, usually lose money, come back, work, 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 work,
Cross
back to the same
over.
thing. Yeah. And I was like,
Wow.
it was awful. It was brutal. I'm not gonna lie. It was some of the hardest stuff in the world, but I was gifted in the sense that a year after that, I was like really tired of playing. I was really tired of doing the coaching playing thing. And US Squash rolled out their first funding program that was actually funding, like not here's like, $1,000 towards your flights, which does very little. It was like, hey, we're going to help you do this. Are you
Mhm.
interested in doing it? And I was like, where do I sign? Yes, please. I will do it. I am your person. And so
Mhm.
I was able to then transition into really full time playing and it made a huge difference, a humongous, humongous difference to not have to worry as much. I still lived at home. I say that I lived at half at home. Obviously I'd started dating Alan and I was able to kind of go back and forth. I would train in Scotland, at their national center and with their setup and kind of go back and forth. If I was over in the UK, I could play the European stuff. And then obviously over in the States, I'd play the stuff stateside and I was able to kind of, Mod Podge it together. But a very proud thing for me was that I always was able to, whether it was from the funding or before that, I always took care of myself. My parents were very much like, hey, if you're going to do this, like, this is your gig. You have to find a
Mhm.
way to pay for it. So I got to coach a camp. I got to coach a camp. I got to give more lessons to pay for my own lessons. I had to do that. And it did teach me that value of like hard work. And if I wanted another lesson, I had to go grind a couple more lessons of my own. So I would go and literally some days I would go and give 3 lessons so I could pay for one lesson with someone else, right? But you
That's
learn what's
brutal.
important to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough, but
Yeah.
it teaches you. And then when the funding came in, it was like a dream come true. And I've been a part of what has now like gone into, it was first called the Elite Athlete Program, is now amalgamated into the HPP program, the High Performance Program, and that is just, I mean, just eons different than when we started. So I just think, I mean, like I said, I'm old. I've been through it all. I've seen the evolution of many things, but that was definitely one of them too.
Are you jealous of the current players in the US getting the support? You being like, what the hell? That should have been there for me.
No, because I
Was-
think that you know why? Because I think the reason that it's there, I like to think that I helped
Hmm.
make it that
No,
it is so,
100%.
and
Yeah.
honestly, I think there's a part of it. It's like I have this debate a lot with a lot of the girls that I'm friends with on tour that I think that one of the biggest disservices that we've done for our upcoming players is that there's no more qualification. I think that having to qualify for events, as hard and brutal as it is,
Right.
was yeah, it was terrible. But guess what? When you became top 24 in the world and you didn't have to qualify for, a platinum event, that was like
Yeah.
a really big stepping stone. Consistently qualifying was hard. It made you tough. It learned that like things aren't gifted to you. When you secured yourself into that next rung, that sense of character and strength that an accomplishment that comes from that is very important. It's supposed to be like, okay, well,
Mhm.
you're just in the main draw. You're paid I mean, not that I have anything wrong with anyone getting paid, but it's more like there's now this idea of, okay, we're trying to, help people along, protect the top less, but there's also this sense of like, well, it like means something to be up there, right? Like you have someone who's nine in the world who's having to play the number one seed in the second round.
Mhm.
Like, is that really like, does that really change things that much? I don't know. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that you, if you're nine in the world, that you should have a little bit more protection, to be honest with you, than that. You've earned that right a little bit, which doesn't exist as much anymore. But no, I'm happy how things are. And it's honestly been a real privilege to see like the National Center be built. We now have this amazing coaching staff and the programs that are running through that. It's exciting. I'm excited. More medals, the better. I want to see more
Yeah.
US flags on the top of the podiums. That's what matters to me.
If not to get like all critical in here, but if there is anything about U.S. squash right now that you think would help better the program with what they are offering right now, is there anything that you've been thinking about in the back of your mind that would really help?
Honestly, I think they're doing a very good job. I think they are managing a lot of different types of people, and that's a really hard
Yeah.
job, right? Like we are not cookie cutters. It's not like, okay, this is the type of player we produce. This is how they play, right?
Mm.
We don't have one of those models that say Australia had, 20 years ago, or even England, England squash had 10 years ago. Every single one of our players plays very differently. We've come
Yeah.
from this very individualized programs. Everyone has a coach that they worked with or a style that they play, a way they like to train, and you're asking them to come together. And that's really hard, right? And we're not young, right? Most of us are on the older side, right? So it's hard to get that top tier to be like, okay, we're going to buy into this thing. It's a difficult ask. And I think that US squash has done the best that they can to show like, well, this is what we have here. This is what we can offer you, and to try and kind of seduce people in through, hey, this is how it works. Honestly, my biggest thing is, and it's not a criticism, it's more like, how do we best serve more people? How do we get more people through the door? And that's more from a growth and development standpoint. That's how can we really convince people like you want to play squash, and not because yes, college is a great thing and that's fantastic, but why do you want to play squash? Why are you going to love this game? What is so wonderful about this game? And that's hard. They've got so many things on their plates. They're trying to cater to the juniors that are advancing super quickly. They have very high, I mean, our women's national team is the second best in the world. We're on our way to being the
It's
best.
insane. Yeah.
It's crazy. It's crazy. And our boys are doing great. They're sixth in the world. There's quality here. So you have these like all these groups, and they're kind of like this mixing melting pot in the middle. I think for me, it's more like, how can we all best serve like this idea of like, how do we get people in? How do I convince, can I get in front of you and say, Sean, this game is going to change your life. You are going to be a different person because of this game, and get more people in. I want to see more people in from different backgrounds, from different socioeconomic backgrounds into
Mm.
the facility. And that's not US squash problem. That's like a world. I think it's a world
Worldwide
problem.
squash.
So
Yeah.
I'm going really existential with it all, but I think to me, that's the most important thing. I want more kids playing squash. So
Yeah.
that's always the question.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's really I think it's a very elitist sport, and I think it's slowly changing here. So
Definitely.
I mean, it definitely requires a lot more work, but we're getting there. Olivia, I almost forgot to ask this. I'm kind of hoping I get the first inside scoop here, but what is next? I don't know if you want to share this, but what's next for you? Are you going to stay somewhat involved in squash, where you're like, hell no, I got other things in plan for me? What's the next chapter look like?
Honestly, at the moment, I have no concrete plans. I do have a few irons in the fire, of things that I'm interested in doing. But honestly, I think people are going to laugh. Like, I've always had 1,000 different things I've wanted to do.
Uh-huh.
Literally, like, I always talk about it in terms of like, well, what is my job when I'm like 60 years old going to be? And what is my job going to be when I'm like 50 years? Like, I have all of these things I want to do. I want to give back to squash. I have been gifted so much from this game, and I would love to stay involved as much as possible. Um, admittedly, I'm less inclined to do it on a coaching, as in a club professional side, even though I actually do enjoy passing on knowledge and being involved in it from that point. I think I'd love to be able to affect more lives than just a couple, kids or students on a court, right? Like that's like a kind of a finite, you have an effect on, say, 15 of your students. And I'm like, how could I maximize this and say affect, you know, 20,000? That would be like, I like think grand scale with things. So I'd love to find myself in a growth and development role of trying to really do a lot of outreach, community building, or getting, like I said, I would love to be the person trying to sell you squash. So that's
I mean,
that's something
already the pitch is already pretty refined right now.
so that's something I'm very interested in. But I have a health coaching certification. I'm hoping to get my yoga teacher certification done in the spring. I've always been really passionate around wellness, female wellness, and empowerment.
Mhm.
I have talked about this, and people say like building a center for wellness where it kind of takes you through being young to kind of an older generation, but really like incorporating all these different modalities, massage, yoga, nutrition, having like my own cafe. Then
Well,
I'm like, oh,
that
like
sounds
maybe I,
fantastic.
yeah, maybe I go to culinary school and become like an organic chef. I love to cook. Then I also, my grandmother is very keen for me to go to school. So she was like, hey, well, if you want to go to school, you can do that. And I'm like, well, if I was going to be anything, when I was in the second grade, I said I wanted to be an obstetrician because I wanted to bring life into this world. So then people are like, well, why don't you go to school and be a nurse and then specialize in midwifery? And I'm like, dang, I might just do that. So, um, at the moment, it's a lot of brainstorming. I'm honestly really open. I'm hoping that maybe people are listening to this podcast and thinking, geez, we might have a job for her. Um, but yeah, I think right now it's just, honestly, I'm spending a lot of time with myself and talking to people I love and saying like, hey, like, what do you think about this? And I think my husband wants me to get a job. He's like, girl, you got to make some money. You can't be sitting on your butt all day. Which is fair. Um, which is very fair. But yeah, at the moment, it's more just like kind of putting feelers out. Like I said, I'd love to stay in squash as much as possible. But I'm also really open. If I kind of feel like, hey, you know what, it is time to kind of shift and really
Mhm.
shift out of it, then so be it. And I'll be, excited to do that and to kind of head down this another kind of facet, that I've always kind of seen for myself. But yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm very open, very
Yeah.
open.
No, that's wonderful. I mean,
Yeah.
you're going to be very busy with all these things
Yeah.
lined up.
Literally. And then I'm like, then I want to have a we're in like the north of Scotland for Christmas. I'm like, I'm going to own a B&B and I'll cook for everyone in the mornings. We'll be in the north of Scotland. We'll have season tickets to my favorite football club. Everything is going to be, Alan's like, Olivia, you're going to be what, 80 years old cooking breakfast for all of these strangers? And I'm like, that sounds like a dream come true,
Fucking
Alan. What are you talking about? This
fantastic.
is
Yeah.
amazing. Like, and I was like, come on, like I can't sit still. Like my mother-in-law was like, you never sit still. I'm like, no, I got to be doing something. I have to be like, something has to be being produced, right? So
Yeah.
we'll see. We'll see.
Oh, that's good. That's great too. I was also curious now that you're out of the let's say you're out of the tour right now. I was hoping to
Yeah.
hear your take on how you feel about the women's game right now. And there's so much depth in the tour right now. It's super entertaining. There's some I'd say some boiling rivalries.
Totally. Honestly, I think it is honestly beautiful to see what is happening right now with the women's
Mhm.
game. I would go so far as to say that the product that the women are producing consistently is and and this is no disrespect to anyone in the men's game, but it is incredible what the women are doing. It
Mhm.
really is. Like the athleticism, the skill level, the tactical awareness. It's brilliant. I mean, they're going to have to drop the tin again because the ladies matches are lasting so long, right?
Yeah.
It is a different kettle of fish now. It is such a marketable product. We have true champions that are able to really carry themselves well, and talk to the spirit of the game. And I hate to say this. I think that the way that the women are is a little bit more touchable than the men. There is this like, you know, the interaction, like the power that that our female squash players have on, say, the younger female generation in a very visceral way is just
Mhm.
so authentic and very and much more close knit than, say, the guys, right? I think we have a cleaner game. I think we have, like I said, people who are there is a pureness to the women's game. I think that when you look at role models, if you say how you want your children to
Mm.
behave when you watch squash, I think that most of the people that you would hope are women. I have to say
Yeah.
that. I not only is the skill level insane, the athleticism is insane, but it's like that's the most thing I would care about. It's like, I want my daughters or my son, whatever, to watch and be like, see that person there. That's the kind of character that you want to hold yourself with. And I'm not going to lie. Like sometimes I'm like, guys, they fall a little short sometimes, you know, and hopefully they're not listening to this, but
Or
it
hopefully
is
it's a wake up call for them.
and I've loved squash since, and I put this in my post, like watched up at Grand Central year after year. I love watching squash, and I mostly watched men's squash when I was a kid, right? Because the WISPA tour was smaller, not as streamed. There wasn't
Mhm.
access to it. But now that I see it so clearly and I've been a part of it, it's like there is it's class. The women's game is class, and I think that I hope that going forward, it continues to be that way, that we encourage the players that have the sportsmanship, that have the ethics, that are champions, and we have plenty of them, that they continue to be what the juniors follow. Because I'm not going to lie, there's some stuff that I'm seeing in the juniors that I worry. I'm like, oh my goodness, like
Yeah.
they're watching too much. And I said to Alex, like, this kid's watching too much PSA. The boy was like under 13s, under 11s. I'm like, he's watching PSA and he's watching someone. How is this kid fist pumping, you know, at whatever, you know, he like bageled some kid and he's fist pumping. And I'm like,
Oh
oh
God.
my God. Oh my,
Oh
like,
God.
I like want to pull my hair out. Alan's like, Olivia, don't worry. And I'm like, I have like a vendetta against this because I'm like, no, this is supposed to be pure. Like,
Yeah.
I'm a squash purist. I'm like, I want what's good for the game, not just what's serving to oneself, right? And it's fun. Like,
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, we're not supposed to delete people's personalities, but there's also this response. There is a responsibility, right, to the young players, right? The whole point is to get more people to play. That's what the product we're selling is squash. When you're a professional player, you are selling it to other people to grow it, right? That's how it grows. That's how the whole thing grows. And I just think it's really important that we make sure that we are, and I say we, no longer in it, not my, not joking, not my responsibility anymore, but
Not.
but that message is trickling down, that it is our responsibility to help the youth see the right way to do this. And there is, you know, yeah, okay, there's controversy. It's fun to do that, but ultimately, this game is a test of character. And how do you
Mhm.
grow character? It's all a metaphor for life, right? If the game is, you're hitting a ball against a wall. We're not curing cancer here. All right. Like, let's just be clear, right? We're not solving world hunger. We're not like, you know, I hate to say it. We're not our jobs are to show that this game builds resilience. It builds determination, that perseverance comes through, that hard work, doing the right thing pays off, that being committed to something for a long time and in the right way pays off, that you get to travel around the world, meet different people doing this, that at the end of the day, you guys both walk off that court and you are both competitors. Yes, maybe someone has more points at the end than the other, but ultimately that every time you play, you are challenged and you are a better person walking off that court
Mm.
than who you were when you walked on.
Well, yeah. Very well said. Olivia, I know we're a bit over the time here, but I still got a
I'm
couple
always over the
questions.
time. I'm always over the time. I'm always over
um,
the time.
no, I actually do have more. I want to do a little bit of like memory lane questions here as we
Okay.
speak about your retirement here. I just kind of want to get these anecdotes and want to start off by like biggest win or proudest moment of your career on the PSA.
Oh man. Oh, honestly, it's so hard because like you always remember what's like closest in your brain, right?
Yeah.
Like I remember the first PSA I won, which was a big deal, and I was like, I was great. and I had some like I had like winning matches that I was so far down, and and hardly ever it's like a tournament or something, but I have to say, like on it, it's not even like PSA. Like I've
Mm.
had some great, like surreal moments. Like when I finally made it onto the glass court at Grand Central Station. I've been attending Tournament of Champions since I was literally in the front pack. My dad used to bring me back before it was in Grand Central Station. It used to be in the Winter Garden, and I was there when I was
Okay.
like a little baby. My dad was a huge squash nut. When I finally like got on that court and won a match, it was just like like dreams, reality mixed, right? Like I was actually like, oh my goodness, this is my dream coming true. And that I can never, that feeling was insane. I remember just, oh, it's just the feelings on my back. But a lot of the proudest matches I won were the ones where I was like up against the wall and it was, you know, 90 minutes in and we're both dying and like you come
Mm.
out and it's like this feeling of like extreme power. They're not the result itself. It was like this overwhelming feeling, but I don't know. It's really fun winning mixed gold with Timmy. Like that's like the most recent memory I have.
Yeah.
And it was my last memory. I mean, who would have thunk it? I said to him in a text message. He sent me an emotional text message. So I said, Timmy, I just didn't think I could top it. That's why I had to call it quits. And it's like because it was such a blast because there was no expectations. It was like I'm just gonna fight till the death with this.
Mm.
But yeah, I
Oh,
mean,
that's wonderful.
it's I don't have a certain thing. The playing in Grand Central was something that was very special to
Oh,
me,
that's yeah.
but not a result.
How about most embarrassing or funny story from the tour that you could share?
Oh man, most embarrassing. I mean, I was a total loser when I was like 15, 16. I thought I was so cool. I was just full of crap. I'm not kidding. Like, I was just like, and I didn't mean it. I didn't mean it at all. I was afraid to seem like I didn't know anything. So I
Mm.
acted like I knew a lot. And that's when it's obvious that you know nothing. So I really sold myself down the river with that one. Okay, this is not an embarrassing thing, but this is kind of
Mhm.
a fun. This is my favorite story I ever had. And it is PSA, but I was very young. So when I was 15 years old, I was going to school in England for a year. I ended up going home after that first year because I was homesick, but I went to boarding school in England and I was playing some PSA events and I had signed up for the Irish Open. So
Mhm.
I'm 15. I like have to take a taxi to the train to the bus to the airport. I mean, it was wild. I finally get to Dublin and I arrive. I'm like showing my passport at customs and they're like, sorry, how old are you? And I'm like 15. They're like, you cannot come into the country on your own. I'm like, they're like, we're going to send you back. And I was like, well, you see, and I'm like thinking on my feet and I go, you see, my uncle's picking me up. And they're like, oh, your uncle, huh? And I was like, yeah, my uncle. And they're like, hold on a second. They walk away. And I'm like, okay, I know that the tournament organizer is a guy named Hugh and he's picking me up. I'm going to lie and say this is my uncle. So I have like, this is at the time when all of like your tournament info is not like on a website. It's like you print it out from
Yeah.
so I have this thing and I'm like, okay, hi, is this Hugh? Yes, it's Hugh. Hugh, it's Olivia Blatchford calling. I am at the airport right now. They don't want to let me in because I'm 15 years old. I told them that you're my uncle. So do you mind just saying like, hey, yes, it is what they call you. So blah, blah. They go, okay, you're going to so he's like, no, no problem, no problem. Okay. All right. See you in a little bit. All right. So I have like literally an immigration officer being like, okay, well, we're going to pick up your bag and you're going to bring me to meet your uncle. I'm like, no problem, pal. I'm good for it. So he takes me out. I pick up my bag and I see this guy walking towards me. He's like looking, smiling. And I'm like, goes, Olivia. And I go, Uncle Hugh. And we do like literally like run into each other's arms. It's so wonderful to see you, Olivia. I'm like, oh, Uncle Hugh, it's so long. And so I have an Uncle Hugh in Ireland now. And the funny thing is that I played the Irish Open many more times, and we decided that every year after that, I would see him and I'd be like, Uncle Hugh, and he'd be like, Olivia. So every time there on after, I had an Uncle Hugh in
That's
at the
so
Fitzroy
funny.
Club in Ireland. So I hope you're listening
That's
to this,
so
Hugh. Uncle Hugh, I miss you. But yeah, that was like my best thing ever. I was like, I can't even believe I
best
thought that.
performance. Best performance.
Best performance by far. I literally was like, my uncle. I don't know where it came from. I'm not a liar, but I was like, boom. Where there's a will, there's a
I
way.
just imagining 15-year-old self you doing this is hilarious.
Say it with
That's good.
confidence. Say it with confidence.
This last one is biggest rival for you that you're gonna look back and say that was my biggest rival on tour for you.
You know, I think me and Sobe did the dance a long time. You know, we did
Mm-hmm.
the junior thing, we did the senior thing. And I think on paper, people would be like, that was my rival. And ultimately, we were teammates. We made each other better always. And I think she sent me a very nice message after I announced my retirement, and we were kind of, going back over memories and stuff. And she on paper is definitely,
Yeah.
we wrote, I think we were able to raise the level in US Wash. And I hate saying that because I like don't like to think of myself as like someone who I just feel lucky to be a part of this. I don't really have like I don't know,
No, I think you got to give
finish.
yourself a little bit of
Yeah.
credit here. I fully agree with you here.
But in this circumstance, I have to admit, I think what Amanda and I at that time were able to do that was so different and changed the game in the States, I think was really special. And although we were rivals, we had bitter battles, and I mean, I got my ass handed to me by her so many times it was ridiculous. But I think what we did was very special. But truly, and I say this and not to be, you know, philosophical about it, but my greatest rival was always myself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I always, it was always one of those things where is Olivia going to be her best friend today? Is Olivia going to be her worst enemy today? And it was very hard. When I was my best friend, I found I, I could play some squash, some serious squash. That was special. And then I had days where I was my own worst enemy and my greatest rival. And I had days where I was like, wow, like, you really got yourself in a state here. But I think if you ask everyone and people will say, oh, this person or that person, it's easy, but it's all a reflection, right? It's always a reflection of you, right? We project so much onto others. We see a rivalry on paper, this person versus that person. And even that, when I watch some of the best rivalries in PSA now, I see it as like this person like battling this part of themselves that they didn't, that they can't see, right? Or like even a skills thing or a vice versa, right? It's like this is something that is that you can see the dynamic shifting because it's a part of themselves, right? It's like not even just the skills on it. It's like deeper than that. So yeah, I would say I was my greatest rival. So
That's good. No, that's fantastic. Olivia, I want to wrap this up with, lastly, I just want to ask you, what would be your message to anyone who wants to pursue a professional career in squash? And I don't know who would be more appropriate to ask than you right now.
Love it. Just love it. Remove as much as you can, detach who you are, as in what it says about you, validation, anything like that. Remove you from your results. The squash is something you have. It's something you do. You take pride in the way you go about doing it. But winning and losing does not define you, and the most important thing will always be to love it and appreciate it. I look back now and like I said, it's like all of my best memories are not like, oh my God, I won this match. And in the moment, it feels like the be all end all. It always does. And that's life, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the moment, everything feels either the best in the world or insurmountable, like despair, right? You're like, oh my God, this is like that's life. But if you can take away how you feel from when you're playing, so instead of I feel this way, but what is happening, right? And if you're able to simply say, you know what, I love this. And regardless of any score, I would show up tomorrow and do it again. You're going to do all right for yourself.
It's a very nice message. Yeah. No, that's great. Thank you. I'm going to wrap it up there, folks. Olivia, again, congratulations on an unfucking believable career you've had. I mean, from the individual accolades to all the medals you've won for USA. Absolute legend for US squash. So thank you for entertaining us for all these years. And just also thank you for joining in the pod. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Sean. I appreciate it.